back to basics, identifying and nurturing good IP behavior. What is good IP behavior? You know, it's been much discussed, both for companies and for individuals. And that may be changing today with AI, you know, with scraping and arguably abuse of fair use. What is, you know, what is good behavior? What is ethical behavior? Efficient infringement, you know, we're familiar with that. You know, is that good behavior? It's good for shareholders, but it may not be good for anyone else. Anyway, Adam, please, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. There you go. Thank you. All right. You know, I wish Bruce hadn't mentioned that there's desserts sitting out there, because isn't that the most dangerous place to be? Is at a conference between you and the conference attendees and a wonderful desserts. It's almost as dangerous as being between a lawyer and a pot of coffee. I'm delighted to be moderating this panel discussion with these great panelists, and a certain aspect of our panel is a little bit now for something completely different in a certain sense, to quote from one of my favorite works of creative art. That the panel so far have, and the speakers so far have largely been talking about kind of the legal issues and legal challenges raised by AI and other types of innovations, the business, how business models relate to this, and of course the technological innovations that are implicated by AI, both past and present. This panel, we are going to be focusing less on law and business models and technology per se, and more on kind of norms, ethics, and culture, right? So what does it mean to have a culture of innovation and creativity? Now, this question, I think, is front and center along with the legal questions and the regulatory questions, because AI is our next generation technology. And whenever there is a next generation technology that's created, whether it was the Industrial Revolution, whether it was the biopharmaceutical revolution of the early 20th century, the computer revolution of the later 20th century, right? This always presents a challenge. It presents a challenge across all areas of society. And typically, you know, especially for those of us who are lawyers in the room, we immediately think of it through the lens of law and how does the doctrine accommodate it, and do we need to change the law, and things that we heard on earlier panels. But these revolutions also prevent challenges to norms and to the oftentimes assumed norms that people have about how they interact with technology and how they use technology to interact with each other, right? And so, you know, one aspect of AI, I think, that implicates this issue is we all very well know that the motto of the high-tech sector is move fast and break things, which is awesome, especially if, you know, and those of us who have children know what it means for people to move fast and break lots of things. But unfortunately for the high-tech space, you know, they're not just kind of breaking norms and sometimes upsetting the way we interact with the world. They're oftentimes challenging and breaking and not respecting underlying rights and underlying claims that people have to the legitimate control and use of the things that they've created, both on the creative industry side and on the innovation industry side. And so to talk about these issues more broadly, we have three fantastic panelists. And I'm a firm believer in not doing lengthy introductions. Embrace our interconnected world. If you want to know more about them, Google them. Even better yet, ask ChatGPT. What would be an excellent what would be an excellent bio for these people? You see where they are up there on the PowerPoint slide. Both, I've known two of them. I've known Patrick for a very long time in our interaction or work at the Global IP Center at the U.S. Chamber, and I've known James Conley for a very long time, though I just blanked on your name. I apologize for that.
Don't worry, Steve.
To continue the theme from my earlier remarks, it's Bruce. So our interactions very much. For those who don't know me, my name is Adam Mossoff. I'm a board member of the Center for Intellectual Property Understanding, which is one of my more proud titles that I wear. And on the side, I'm a professor at George Mason University School of Law, where I focus on patent law and innovation policy. And last but certainly not least, we have Albhy Galuten, who our great representative from someone who has spanned all sectors of the economy and of creativity and innovation. So thank you, Albhy, for everything you've done with your patent innovations and your work and incredible work in creative art and music and everything of that sort. So it's always an honor to be at conferences and to be engaged with people such as yourself. All right, I'm going to go through the panel starting with Patrick and just kind of pose to you. So Patrick, what do you think is the kind of some of the challenges or interesting issues that are being presented in kind of at the level of norms and culture and business ethics and ethics more generally?
Well, thanks, Adam. It was great to be here. I want to thank Bruce in particular for generously inviting me to join this conversation again this year. And I will go back to the theme of the panel, back to basics, and say at the Global Innovation Policy Center at the U.S. Chamber, we have a mantra that innovation happens everywhere. But then we have another mantra that innovation is not inevitable. So how do these two things coexist? Well, first of all, I think the urge and the ability to innovate is an essential element of our humanity, something we all share everywhere, everywhere in the world. We want to express ourselves creatively. We want to find new ways to do things. And in fact, we see that happening everywhere in the world. But too often throughout human history, that's resulted in flashes of brilliance, incremental improvements that too often don't build to anything. So what's changed in these incredible last few centuries of unprecedented technological progress? It's the environmental conditions, the legal, economic, technological conditions that have enabled transformative innovation and sustained and consistent innovation. And you see that happen specifically in the places where those environmental factors are fostered, namely here in the United States, where it's written into our Constitution. So when we think about innovation and intellectual property, first we have to recognize what those conditions are that have led to this success. I think about private property rights. I think about rule of law. And I think about an ecosystem that facilitates knowledge diffusion, technology transfer, and collaboration, including public-private partnerships. And we've seen those in spades in the United States until recently we start to see more of that breaking down. When we think about technology and AI, with due respect to Mr. Nelson, I would say we don't ever violate the laws of physics, but sometimes we find ways to harness them that we may not yet fully appreciate. I think the same is true of economic principles. We saw that in the internet bubble of the late 90s. People wanted to say, well, the old economic rules are gone. Is the new economy, new rules for the digital age. No, the same economic principles applied. In fact, and we found out how that worked very quickly when the internet bubble burst. I think we're going to see the same thing with respect to artificial intelligence, that private property rights are going to matter. We're going to have to find new ways, perhaps, to harness the economic principles related to private property rights. We might find that our intellectual property system is anachronistic, that maybe it's too narrow and limited in its conception, and that we're going to have to find ways to provide rights or at least effective control to a much broader range of intangible assets to be able to give individuals the agency that they need, and I'm quoting James here, to really prosper in this new world. But what can happen, because the alternative to private property rights is what we had for much of human history. You had peasants and you had lords. And the lords were the people who gathered the strength to fight, and gather more resources to themselves. And the peasants were the people who served the lords and lived under their protection. And if we fail to provide private property rights in this digital era, we're going to find ourselves right back in that situation.
So Albhy, so you're on the ground, and so to speak. In what way do you see kind of AI, implicating kind of our ethics and norms and our behaviors in society?
Well, since our mandate is ethics and norms, let me start off with ethics. So AI is trained, but even though you have a training set, you have to ask it what to do. And one might say that historically, if you look at Facebook as an example, they ask their AI to optimize on engagement, which triggers, our oldest parts of our brain to say, whoops, there's a tiger. And so as a result, we have the National Enquirer mentality where we are all driven to go to the lowest common denominator, and it increases engagement. So it was good for their bottom line. It was not good for the health of young women. So it comes down to what you ask your AI to do. In 10 years, AI will have agency. Right now, robots are mostly in factories and maybe self-driving cars. But there's no question that robots will be able to see better, hear better, feel better, even read us better. They now can have lie detectors that use facial detection that are more accurate than the old lie detectors they used to have because of microfacial expression. So we will have the ability to have robots walking around on the planet who can do everything better than we can and will know what we're thinking and know what we feel. And the question is, for AI, what is your goal? So you could ask, if I were to ask an AI, say, make America's economy stronger than China's, without any more directions, it might respond by creating a virus that decimated the Chinese rice crop. That's not what we intended, but AI is not, they only know what you ask it to do. And so you have to figure out how to determine what questions you're asking and how to add forensic accountability to the way it makes those decisions. I asked Eric Schmidt, we were at a conference about, 8 years ago, and Google were doing stuff with AI, and I said, what are you doing about determining forensically how you know that it made its decision? And he just said, oh, don't worry, as Eric Schmidt, don't worry, we've got all that covered. The reality is that the large tech companies, the people who are most engaged in this, are incentivized to optimize their bottom line, not incentivized to optimize the health of the planet. And so as a result, if something like adding forensic accountability to your AI could be done, it's not necessarily incentivized for them to do it because it filters their opportunities. I know someone, I can't talk about it because we're under NDA, who is, say they have a solution to determining how an AI chose the copyrighted material to create the output. So what percentages of the input generated what parts of the output. If this were a priority for Google and Facebook and Amazon and Microsoft 10 years ago, we would not be having this discussion. We would be able to have provenance. There is, I have heard, and I didn't confirm this because I didn't have time to read the EULA, that in Photoshop, that their claim is that all of their training data is approved, that everyone has granted them the rights to use their training data. But what I've gathered is that in order to use the system, when you click the EULA, you have to give them the rights to use your training data. And apparently you can not give them those rights if you agree to only work offline and not use any of their online resources. So we are ethically, we're at a cornerstone or at a crossroads between what we want our goals as a society to be and what we want the AI to be doing for us. And I would say that the goal should be to improve human lives and to make our lives more enriched and more rewarding, not necessarily to increase the bottom line for the fewer and fewer companies who have the resources to manage these very large language models.
Well, that's
Sorry,
that's a very good wind-up for you, James. Who
I don't know if I want that wind-up. I don't know if I have much to add to that. That was profound, gentlemen. But as I hear it, beginning with what Patrick said, I'm reminded of a visit to the coast of France, Normandy, and specifically in the tidal bore there is an island named Mont Saint-Michel. The top of the island is a giant monastery where all the knowledge in Europe was kept for essentially 800 years. And during that time, the whole idea of the incentive to share knowledge was, not promoted. Knowledge was power. We are here in a period now where knowledge has become so shareable and such a zero marginal cost of production that we just can't even imagine a society where the knowledge is somehow compartmentalized and the rest of the humanity is held hostage to those who understand it. But what makes me think of Albhy's riff on this is there's always going to be a tension between those who have some knowledge and those who have the means to commercialize it. And we're always going to be in some kind of moral quandary with respect to these rights. It's never going to be perfect. We're always going to have to, as creators and owners, be aware of the fact that we may have to do just exactly what you did, Dr. Nelson. Take the agency to go to the USPTO and explain, hey, this is possible. We are not violating laws of physics here. We're just doing it in a little more clever way that perhaps you were never taught. But what we have to make sure exists, Adam, is a system where we feel we can safely do that. We have to feel that we have the agency to go and have the conversation, not just at the USPTO like you did, but in all the halls of Congress. We don't want to be haunted by something that we said in one conversation with the FDA that somehow trips us up because of lack of institutional knowledge. You actually played the game, and you benefited from a lack of institutional knowledge. To your credit, right? Now you're solving the solution for lung cancer from all that you learned, and the FDA doesn't remember, about what you did for cervical cancer. So in the middle of all that, I'm sure someone's rights are infringed. And that's an ethical quandary. But we as a society have to be able to say, do we want Alan to go through, solve the problem, address lung cancer, and not worry about these rights? I think, in some circumstances, we have to say, just go and do it. But, there's got to be some recollection of all that, and I leave that to the lawyers.
Well, I prefer to think of us as fellow professors and academics,
Well,
although you're also an inventor. And thank you for that as well. And so you live at this kind of world of tension between theory and practice.
Yeah, and I had, my co-inventor really went through hell. He was Jerry Lemelson. And this fella, I only dealt with him in the last 5 or 10 years of his life, but every single day of those 10 years was litigation.
Yeah.
So it was no way to live. And he survived only on the strength of will, but he was in the middle of that tension, right? It was an unclear legal system. So this is the imperfect world. But with our agency, somehow we'll find a way. And we have to feel like we have the agency to go and address that.
Well, you talk about the need for the agency that might result in violating or infringing rights, and Albhy mentioned kind of an alternative type of agency where Adobe kind of exploits a certain mechanism that is legally sufficient and totally above the table, but nonetheless has a for lack of a better term, a smell factor to it.
Golden handcuffs.
Yeah, golden handcuffs. What we in the law would call an adhesion contract.
Mm-hmm.
Which people often don't think of, take it or leave it.
Contract.
Yes. And of course, all of so this speaks to the interplay between kind of the norms and the way people think about our rights and our creations. I know, Patrick, you had mentioned that you had some thoughts on the Center for Intellectual Property and Understanding's IP survey that it had done. So very important, job of the Center for Intellectual Property and Understanding is to promote understanding of intellectual property, not just as a legal matter or in the policy world, but generally within the society. And so we, in part, you ensure that you have evidence-based understandings, you need to have the evidence. So we did a survey of what people think about intellectual property. And Patrick, you mentioned that you had that a part of it was triggered you.
That's the perfect word. I thought it was interesting to note the views, and I talked a little bit about private property already, so I won't repeat myself, but scoring even below that in terms of the level of skepticism associated with these statements was the idea that intellectual property promotes sharing.
Yeah.
And I think, Adam, you and I have had a chance to have these conversations a lot. What we see is a robust innovation ecosystem in the United States where sharing of IP is part of a continuum that stretches across the innovation life cycle and involves an enormous ecosystem of stakeholders whereby the economic freedom associated with a well-defined property right vested in a patent and the freedom to license to others and have those contracts enforced enables technology transfer on a level that we've never seen before in the world, and that in the pandemic, many countries wanted to be part of and yet drew the perverse conclusion that they should weaken intellectual property rights as a way to get that technology transfer rather than strengthen their IP systems in order to become part of the ecosystem. So, Heather and I could talk for hours about that. But, the point is, these are, I believe, Bruce, IP stakeholders in the United States that you surveyed. And to see that level of skepticism from professionals in the field about IP as a means to collaboration and the importance of recognizing IP as a private property right, that was just stunning. And I would just add to that, all property rights are artificial, right? Your ownership of your car, your house, anything else. We have those rights not because they're natural rights, although they may be, but their enforceability is based on society legislating laws to provide them and to enforce them. The working of the system depends on ensuring that those same rights are provided for intangible assets as much as for our physical goods. Yeah. You would never leave your car parked in the street with the keys in it and expect to have it in the morning. And if you did have that expectation, you would pay a whole lot less for it. Well, that's the situation we've put our intellectual capital in.
Yeah. Jim, when he mentioned these issues, you gave me a side glance, so I don't know.
Yeah,
James,
there's some interesting research that I think everyone should take a look at. It's published by Karsten Fink. It goes back to a WIPO publication in 2013. Mm-hmm. We should all have a look at that because at that time, the PCT system could track where the most inventive people in the planet, as defined by PCT applications. They looked at the longitudinal history of inventors and where they claimed they lived during this period of time. And they could see migration patterns. Very distinct migration patterns. The most popular inventors, the most productive inventors were migrating away from those countries that had weak intellectual property systems toward those systems that had the strongest. And of course, this country was the one that was the net aggregator of it. This was such powerful data that WIPO stopped collecting it for political reasons. So I can understand your mystery. The world is dealing with a much different set of variables than necessarily intellectual property, survival and the like. So they prioritize these things accordingly. I've had these conversations in India as well. And I'm not surprised by that, but then of course what happens is some countries fill up with very clever inventors to the net effect of a very positive economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, how much is the value of invention associated with the American ethic of rewarding business success and having a culture where people work very, very hard to make money? In France, they work very, very hard to retire at 62 or whenever they retire because that's their goal in life. In America, the primary goal is to make money. And this extreme desire to be successful brings people here and also rewards invention and rewards business. How much of this is associated with America's sort of economic political system.
I think American materialism is an issue, right? But I think in terms of intellectual property innovation, that might be a little bit misplaced. And it comes up in one of the themes for this panel was words, right? Words matter. We used to hear everyone talk about incentive and reward, and as an artist, if you do something new and creative, you'll be rewarded with a copyright. Fortunately, I think that word has fallen out of favor a bit in IP circles because it was never really accurate, right? You weren't you earned it. You earned what you had title to. I have similar problems with the word incentive because it suggests that people are doing something just to be rewarded with money. I don't believe that's the case. People like Dr. Nelson and so many others in the room, you innovate because you want to be innovative. And your title to your work, no different than your title to your car or your house, is not a reward. It's a documentation, of what you've done and your ownership related to your labor. And I think it's important that we don't lose sight of that.
I don't disagree at all. I agree 100%. My point was just that it is the goal of trying to get yourself out of poverty, out of a poorer situation that makes people move to this country, which is then correlated with more IP rights. It is not, they don't come here because the patent system is better for them. They come here because there's an economic opportunity, and that is sort of correlated.
So does that suggest that IP helps to foster economic and social mobility, and that's something that all Americans, including migrants to America, are seeking?
I think they run in parallel. I'm not sure there's causation, but that's definitely correlation between successful IP and economic opportunity.
And the culture that keys into both.
Right, so we have the venture capitalists here in the room. They'll make a bet, right? There's no venture capital community like that in Europe. So you get to a certain stage of build out with your startup in Europe, and you're coming to the US for the rest of the money. And that's just a fact.
Sure.
That's just a fact. Because here, people will make a bet. There's trust in the institutions, like property, that will give them some competitive advantage. And the erosion of that trust foundation is something that we always have to be concerned about.
Well, venture is really just like the film industry or the music industry. You make a bet on something you think has 20% chance of succeeding with 100x return, and you bet on a dozen of them, and if a few succeed, you make it back. The film industry is just the same, the music industry is just the same, and the VC industry is just the same.
But that's part of the American success story too, right? Is that we're able to mobilize capital to those risky ventures.
Right.
Because of our economic freedom, because of the strength of the system, the rule of law, the property rights, and without that, we would be Europe, perhaps, So what do we do to mobilize all of the assets that are vested in, we talked a lot about data today, but it's information and information analysis, it's know-how and artistry and talent and skill sets that we can invest in and develop over time. How do we mobilize that capital? The analogy was made to oil, data being oil. I like to think of know-how in terms of like shale oil. We know it's there, but it's latent, and you can't extract it until you create the conditions for it to be, to be monetized. I think we're on the verge of that, but we haven't quite done it yet.
I think there's a problem with the conditions needed to be met, and that is you need, in order to make these innovative leaps. First, let me back up for a second. AI generally does not invent anything. It's trained on the past. So the AI is almost the National Enquirer by definition. It's the lowest common denominator.
That's Albhy.
I mean,
That's what AI Someone post that on X. AI
is really, really good. If you have a lot of doctors who have looked at a lot of x-rays and you train AI with that, it can be incredible at that. AI would never have come up with the Beatles in 1961. It was only trained on the past. And the difficulty that I see with with AI is in many industries, it is eliminating the need for apprenticeship. Now, if you want to be a filmmaker, you start by doing coverage, by reading scripts, working someplace. If you want to do that as a lawyer, I mean, now you can have your AI read all your agreements and flag the things for you. And so how do you train people who are trying to learn a field if there are no apprenticeship jobs? If all the low-level training jobs are taken by AI, you have a hole in the process that's going to bring people to become the Beatles, to invent those things that you never thought of before, because AI is mostly just rehashing everything that already existed.
Matt, I don't want to.
No, but
I mean, I sort of get the sense that, and I'm not the AI expert by any stretch, but that the people who are would differ slightly in terms of AI just regurgitating what it's heard somewhere else, that it actually is, this sum is, you know, the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts in effect. And I don't know enough to evaluate that, but that's certainly the impression that I get from people who do.
There is no question that you can make the argument that AI is creative. Certainly the Go example, the Go masters, when they looked at the way whatever Google's AI system was, said they thought of things I had never thought of. There's no question that AI will come up with things that we hadn't thought of. What I'm getting at, though, is that it doesn't think out of the box today. Now, there may be in the future when you're using AI to analyze people's emotions and you are, you know, doing microfacial recognition of everything going on, that it will begin to solve all kinds of problems that we couldn't imagine solving. But I do not want to lose. For me, the reason I stopped producing records is that I used to be in the studio with musicians and we'd stand on the floor and throw ideas around and create. And it was incredibly rewarding and fun. And as we migrated into a world where you did it one instrument at a time and you worked out the parts, it was less fun. And the reason I like technology is we stand around on a whiteboard and we come up with ideas. This is what makes humans wonderful. If you're going to have the pleasure of making a film or making a song, you want the joy of making it. You don't just want it to show up on your desk. What are you going to do with your life? So I think that for me, it comes back to goals. What do we want AI to do for us? We want it to eliminate the drudge. If the AI can take out the trash for me and bring it to the dump and recycle it for me, fantastic. But if AI is going to tell me what to say to my wife on Tuesday after dinner, I don't want that.
Okay, I'll just add one thing, because last night I had a chance to chat with Albhy. And he gave me an insight on one of his great talents. And apparently he doesn't remember anything. But he comes to most challenges, and this is unique to these very creative individuals, without any biases, because he just can't remember anything. Okay? Now that's a great skill. The machines that we train with AI are going to remember everything, including the conversation with your wife last Tuesday evening.
Right.
Okay? Careful. and what I worry about, to the ethics point, is that they're also going to remember all of our ethical breaches.
yeah, that's interesting.
Okay, so to the extent that they're encoded in something that is part of a language set that trains them, that's going to be part of the intelligence. The artificial intelligence will just make the same ethical judgments that we fail to do correctly. So, anyway.
And we're already seeing a lot of issues already arise about the inherent value-laden judgments that the people who are designing the AI systems are building into them.
Yeah.
Already we're seeing some of that, and you can see how this might end up, creating a feedback loop in a certain way with some of this, with this type of learning. I do want to make sure we get some questions from the audience before we continue this fantastic conversation. But more than happy to continue it if anyone doesn't have any questions. But here's your chance. We have three amazing people up here to ask about the work they do or views
We
that they
left you
have.
speechless. That was
Yeah.
good.
No. We have a question right in the front.
Oh, excellent. Please.
I'll just speak up. With, I guess the Alice and, the 2011 patent reform, we've seen more and more billion-dollar companies without patent, right? And I tend to assume with AI coming about, and the discussion earlier today that said it cost $1 billion in lobbying before. It's going to cost a lot more for the AI change, right? You were talking, our voices need to be heard in the halls of Congress. They won't, though, right? I mean, is there any way that us can actually stop any of that when it's really the money of OpenAI, investors, all of those that are going to, flood the halls of Congress, and then we're going to continue this path of just not having agency over what we have.
Okay, so I'll take a crack at that right away. Bruce mentioned in his opening remarks that by some miracle, the subject of next year's National High School debating teams is going to be whether or not we should have intellectual property. Okay? Now, I was, at a little bit of debate in high school. I can tell you that was nowhere on the radar. And I have 5 kids, and it's nowhere on their radar. So the fact that we've somehow succeeded in moving this to the high school discussion level is very big. That's going to be part of the agency. Because the kids the next generation will have heard it. They will have debated it. They'll have done research on it. And they'll be able to decide for themselves, is this really important? They're going to remember Alan's story. They're going to hear a whole bunch of stories. They're going to hear Tiffany's story, which we'll hear later, okay? So, I mean, this is an important element of enablement, but people have to hear about it and understand it before Congress. Not everyone's going to be able to get the ladies to go and send a letter to the FDA.
Yeah.
Right.
Agreed.
Don't you think OpenAI knows that the high school debate is that as well? And they can just, because there is no control over what they train their models to do, theoretically, when all the high schoolers, we know how they do their research.
Yes.
ChatGPT.
But but the important thing about the debate is now they've got to be critical thinkers. That's what the machines won't do.
You talk about bias in the system, and no coincidence if, in fact, the question they're posed with is whether or not there should be IP, as
think it's
opposed to,
expanding
say,
IP
the question of how should IP rights be protected, which would be a much different.
The actual question for the debaters is, should IP rights in the U.S. be strengthened, which is more specific and even a stronger.
I like that one better.
Excellent question.
Well, this seems. I'm sorry, Madeline.
No, I'm wondering, I would love to hear some of your ideas for incentivizing good IP behavior. Repeatedly I hear from inventors their concerns about theft and stealing, and it's having not worked in a large company, I don't know how those conversations go down. The law, our legal system is struggling to, address these issues for all the reasons we're aware of. So are there some other ways we can motivate people in our fields to have good IP behavior for the next generation?
I would like to think that it's inevitable. We are going from, we have things that were virtual and things that were real. Everyone says, oh, this is my car, and my car registration is a piece of paper in the glove box. I have my California driver's license in my phone. It is a digital California driver's license. By the way, they don't accept it at the airport yet, but it is a California driver's license in my phone.
Details.
As all of these non-fungible things, ignoring the use of the NFT, if all of these non-fungible things begin to have value, hopefully consumers begin to say that, okay, my car registration, my driver's license, my marriage certificate, my home deed, all these things are virtual and they have value. And by the way, my digital image of the Salvator Mundi by Leonardo da Vinci is also of value and it needs to be protected. And so is my scan of my pap smear, and so is every other thing that goes on. We move into a world where the acceptance of the value of the uniqueness and the protection of virtual objects becomes almost equivalent to those physical objects. That's my hope. It's a great future. It's self-healing.
So this seems like a good venue to cite Milton Friedman, who actually said, believe it or not, the role of government in the market is to determine, arbitrate, and enforce the rules of the game. And with respect to AI, I really wanted to ask Dr. Nelson, given your experience with the FDA, where it started and where it is today, how would you feel about a similar, government regulatory oversight of AI tools?
I'd love to answer that. But I have to tell you one more piece then. We've all assumed that we have a common understanding that AI improves over time as the database enlarges, as the concept of truth in the database becomes more apparent, and so it goes. One little area where I think the government ought to lean in on the FDA is as follows. The FDA required that the pap smear screening machine did not sign out a case. They still say that's the doctor's job. And the doctor says, how can I sign out a case if I didn't see the cells? So they required us to show the doctor the cells that were abnormal by our machine. And the doctor then says, I agree, and I'll sign out the case. Okay, that's the way it works. But then we said to the FDA, well, if we add that technology to allow them to do that, wow, this is great, because we now can continue training our machine over time. Every time a woman gets a pap smear, a doctor interacts, we get the new data, we improve our AI, and the machine will just get better over time. And we can prove that to you. And the FDA said, no way will we approve a technology that changes over time. Forget it. You know, lock it up. Will not
Is that the
happen.
definition of science?
Lock it up. So this is exactly an area where the government could lean on and say, how can you stop a technology that will naturally get better over time from doing that? I mean, get the data every time somebody uses it, more data comes in. I mean, that's crazy. And we never overcame that issue.
But what do they do about false negatives?
What did they?
I mean, because
they
I understand, you know, false positive, the doctor signs off on it,
well,
okay,
the
this is positive.
motivation was a false negative in the first place. They don't care about false positives. That may result in over-treatment of the patient. The medical system understands.
But I mean, if your system didn't pick it up, then the doctor says, well, I didn't see it either, but you already know that's...
Oh, the human false negative.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we would have to make sure that did not happen. If we're going to use that data to retrain our system, we can't have human error pollute the results. So it's only in the case where they
That's
agree
the ethical fault I'm
that it
talking
was an
about.
abnormal case and they tell us why, that we continue the training. And that would be the overall benefit. We've actually never seen a doctor who disagreed with the result. Interesting. So we're missing an amazing opportunity, and between now and then, hundreds of thousands of patients have gone through this machine, and we have no benefit of the additional training that could have occurred to make it better.
It's the difference between the innovation mentality on the one hand and the risk adverse, there might be a problem, we can't do anything here on the other side. And, you know, and I think that that's always going to be a tension that we have, that, you know, the government actors and institutions tend to be on the risk adverse side, and the innovators tend to be on the let's make things happen. Although Albhy is far too optimistic, I in saying that robots will have agency in 10 years. I'm not looking forward to when the Terminator receives his patent rejection from the USPTO and says I'll be back. And with that, I turn us back over to our fearless leader to
Thank
continue our
you.
program.
Adam, that's
Thank you.
right.
Thank you.